I've been with my fiancé Anthony for 4 years. We got engaged 7 months ago, and the wedding is supposed to be in October. I say supposed to because at this point I genuinely don't know if there's gonna be a wedding, and that kills me because I love this man more than I've ever loved anyone. But there's this thing, or should I say this person. Her name is Piper, and she's been Anthony's best friend since they were kids. Like childhood neighbors, grew up together, the whole deal. They're from the same small town in Wisconsin, and moved to Minneapolis around the same time after college. When Anthony and I first started dating, he was super upfront about Piper. Told me she was basically like a sister to him, that they'd been through everything together, that she was non-negotiable in his life. And look, I'm not one of those women who thinks men and women can't be friends. I have guy friends. My brother's wife is cool with his female friends. It's not about that. I tried to be cool with Piper. I really did. For like the first year, I bent over backwards trying to befriend this woman. The thing is, she never gave me a real chance. From day one, there was this energy. You know when you can just feel that someone doesn't like you? She'd do this thing where she'd smile at me, but her eyes were completely dead. She'd ask me questions about myself, but then immediately change the subject before I could finish answering. She'd make inside jokes with Anthony right in front of me and then go, "Oh, sorry, you wouldn't get it, it's from high school." Every single time we hung out, I felt like I was intruding on something, but I told myself I was being paranoid. Anthony kept saying Piper takes a while to warm up to people, that she's protective of him because he'd been hurt before, that once she saw how happy I made him, she'd come around. So I kept trying. I invited her to brunch. I remembered her birthday. I asked her for recommendations on stuff Anthony would like. I was doing everything right, and she still treated me like I was some random girl Anthony brought home from a bar. The first real incident happened about 6 months into our relationship. Anthony's birthday was coming up, and I'd been planning this whole thing with his other friends. Dinner at his favorite spot. Surprise after party at our friend Roger's place. The works. I'd been coordinating for weeks. Then 3 days before his birthday, Piper texts him saying she already planned something for just the two of them. Some tradition they apparently have where they go back to their hometown for his birthday weekend. She'd already booked a cabin. Already told his mom they were coming. Didn't ask me if I wanted to come. Didn't check if he had other plans. Nothing. And here's the thing that made me lose it. Anthony didn't immediately say no. He actually sat there looking conflicted and started talking about how they'd done this every year since they were 16, and he didn't want to hurt Piper's feelings. I just stared at him like, "Are you serious right now? I'm your girlfriend. I've been planning your birthday for weeks. And your response to finding out your female best friend booked a weekend cabin trip with you is to consider going?" We had our first major fight that night. I told him flat out that this was inappropriate and he needed to tell Piper he couldn't go. He got frustrated with me, said I was making it into something it wasn't, that Piper was like family. I said if she was like family, she would have included me in the plans. He said she probably assumed I wouldn't want to come to some boring small town. I said she assumed, because she didn't want me there. We went back and forth for hours until finally he agreed to tell Piper he couldn't do the cabin thing this year. But here's what really got under my skin. When he called Piper to cancel, she started crying, like full-on sobbing, saying she'd already paid for everything, that this tradition was so important to her, that she'd been looking forward to it for months. And Anthony looked at me with this expression like I was the one who'd done something wrong, like I was being unreasonable by not wanting my boyfriend to go on an overnight trip with another woman. Eventually, he did cancel. Piper was cold to me for months after that, and Anthony kept bringing up how upset she'd been. That set the tone for the next 3.5 years. Every holiday, every milestone, every important moment, Piper would find some way to insert herself or compete for Anthony's attention. She'd call him during our date nights with some crisis. She'd show up at his apartment unannounced when I was there. She'd post throwback photos of them together on social media with captions like, "My person," and "Nobody knows me like you do." When we moved in together, she literally cried and told Anthony she felt like she was losing him, and every single time I brought up how uncomfortable this made me, Anthony would defend her. He'd say I was reading too much into things. He'd say Piper was just an affectionate person. He'd say I needed to work on my insecurity because this jealousy wasn't healthy. That word, jealousy. He's thrown that at me probably 100 times over 4 years like it's supposed to end the conversation. Like the second he calls me jealous, I'm supposed to shut up and accept whatever Piper does. I'm not jealous, I'm not insecure, I'm a grown woman who can see what's right in front of her face, and what's right in front of my face is another woman who wants my fiancé. The vacation thing happened last summer, and it's honestly what pushed me to start seeing this whole situation differently. Anthony and I had been planning a trip to Portugal for our 3-year anniversary. Just us. I'd been so excited because we rarely got real alone time, and this was going to be 10 days of just exploring and being together. I'd saved up for months. We'd looked at apartments together, planned which cities we wanted to see, made a whole itinerary. 2 weeks before we were supposed to leave, Anthony comes home and tells me Piper's going through a really hard time. Her mom was sick and she'd just gone through a breakup and she needed to get away. And wouldn't it be nice if she came with us to Portugal? He said it so casually, like he was asking if we could pick up milk on the way home. I literally laughed because I thought he was joking. When I realized he wasn't, I asked him if he'd lost his mind. This was our anniversary trip. We'd been planning it for 6 months. And he wanted to invite Piper? He said I was being selfish, said Piper needed support, and he couldn't just abandon her when she was struggling. I said then take her on a separate trip. Why does it have to be our trip? That turned into the biggest fight we'd ever had. He said I was putting him in an impossible position, that Piper was his oldest friend and I was making him choose. I said no, you're making a choice by even asking this. I said a normal best friend would never invite themselves on a couple's anniversary trip and a normal boyfriend would never consider letting them. He said Piper didn't invite herself. He invited her, and that made it even worse, honestly. We fought about it for days. I cried, he got frustrated, I cried some more. Eventually, I gave in because I was exhausted, and I thought maybe I was being too rigid. Maybe it wouldn't be that bad. Maybe having Piper there would actually help me bond with her finally. God, I was so stupid. Portugal was a nightmare. Piper was there for every single meal, every tour, every sunset, every moment. When Anthony and I tried to do something alone, she'd get pouty and say she felt left out. She kept reminiscing about trips she and Anthony had taken together before me, places they'd been, things they'd done. She'd grab his arm when we were walking. She'd sit next to him at restaurants instead of across from him, so I'd have to sit alone on my side of the table. One night, we were at this beautiful rooftop bar watching the sunset, and I went to the bathroom, and when I came back, she was practically leaning on him, whispering something in his ear, and they both stopped talking when they saw me. I confronted Anthony about it that night in our room, and he still defended her. Said I was ruining the trip with my attitude, that Piper was just being friendly, that I needed to relax. I said having another woman whisper in my fiancé's ear at a romantic sunset bar is not something I should have to relax about. He said I was being dramatic. That trip changed something in me. I stopped trying to make Piper like me. I stopped pretending everything was fine. When we got back, I started really paying attention to how she acted around Anthony and around me. And the more I paid attention, the more I saw. She'd touch him constantly. Little touches on his arm, his shoulder, his back. She'd stand too close. She'd find excuses to be alone with him. She'd make comments about how well she knew him that felt pointed, like she was reminding me that she'd known him longer. She'd bring up memories I wasn't part of. She'd reference future plans that only included the two of them. And she was nice to my face the whole time. That's what made it so insidious. She wasn't obviously mean to me. She just made me feel invisible. About 3 months after Portugal, I started noticing Anthony pulling away a little. He was more irritable with me, quicker to snap, less affectionate. I asked him if something was wrong, and he said work was stressful. I asked if there was anything else, and he got weirdly defensive. This went on for weeks, and I kept trying to figure out what had changed. Then one night, we were at Roger's place for a game night thing, and I overheard something that made everything click. I'd gone to the kitchen to get more drinks, and Piper was in the hallway on her phone. Didn't see me. She was talking to someone, I think her sister, and I heard her say my name. So obviously I stopped and listened. She was saying she didn't understand what Anthony saw in me, that I was boring and basic and not even that pretty, that she'd been telling Anthony for months that he could do better, but he wouldn't listen, that I was holding him back and he deserved someone on his level, that she was working on it though, working on it, like breaking us up was some kind of project for her. I stood there frozen for probably a full minute just processing what I'd heard. This woman who'd been smiling at me all night, who'd complimented my earrings when I walked in, who'd hugged me hello, had been actively trying to sabotage my relationship. For months, maybe longer. I didn't confront her that night. I was too shocked, and honestly, I wanted to talk to Anthony first. I thought, okay, this is the proof I needed. Now he has to see it. Now he can't defend her anymore. I waited until we got home and I told him everything I'd overheard. His reaction destroyed me. He didn't get angry at Piper. He didn't apologize for not believing me. He said maybe I misheard. He said Piper vents sometimes, but she doesn't mean it. He said she's probably just stressed about her mom and taking it out on the easiest target. He said I shouldn't have been eavesdropping anyway. I was screaming at him, asking how he could possibly defend her after what I just told him. She called me boring and basic and said she's been actively trying to convince him to leave me, and his response is to make excuses for her. He yelled back that I'd been hostile to Piper for years, and maybe she was just reacting to that. I said I bent over backwards to be nice to that woman, and she's hated me since day one. He said maybe there was a reason for that. We didn't speak for 2 days after that fight. Just existed in the same apartment like strangers. Eventually he apologized, kind of. Said he didn't mean to dismiss me, that he talked to Piper, that he wanted us to work through this. I asked him what specifically he was going to say to her. He said he'd ask her to be more mindful of how she talks about me. Mindful. She's been running a campaign to end our relationship, and he's gonna ask her to be mindful. I told him that wasn't good enough, that I needed him to actually set a boundary with Piper, that she needed to know there would be consequences if she kept trying to interfere in our relationship. He got that look again, that frustrated look like I was asking for something unreasonable. He said I couldn't expect him to throw away a 20-year friendship over one overheard comment. I said it wasn't one comment. It was a pattern going back years. And if he couldn't see that, then maybe he didn't want to see it. That was about 2 months ago. Anthony did talk to Piper. I don't know exactly what he said, but whatever it was didn't work because she's still around constantly, still calling him at weird hours, still showing up at our place, still posting those social media things. And now she's making wedding demands. She wants to be his best woman instead of him having a best man. She wants to plan his bachelor party. She wants to give a speech at the reception. And Anthony is actually considering all of it. When I said absolutely not to the bachelor party planning, she asked me if I didn't trust my own fiancé, right there in front of him, with this innocent face like she wasn't the problem. There's more. So much more, but I need to stop here because this is already way too long. I guess I'm posting because I need outside perspective. Am I crazy? Is this normal best friend behavior and I'm just too jealous to see it? Because Anthony makes me feel like I'm losing my mind, but everything in my gut tells me this woman wants him for herself, and he either can't see it or doesn't want to. I love him so much, but I don't know how much more of this I can take. Update. Okay, so first of all, thank you to everyone who commented on my last post. I read every single one, and honestly, some of you made me cry. Not in a bad way, just in a, oh my god, other people see it too, I'm not insane way. A lot of you told me to run, and I get it, I really do, but it's not that simple when you've built a life with someone for 4 years. When you love them, when you can see the person they are underneath all this mess with Piper. But I hear you, I do. Anyway, things have escalated significantly since I posted, and I need to vent again because I'm literally shaking as I type this. Actually, no, I'm not shaking, I'm furious, there's a difference. So after my last post, I decided I needed to have a real conversation with Anthony. Not a fight, an actual adult conversation where I laid everything out calmly and gave him a chance to really hear me. I waited until we'd both had a good day, made his favorite dinner, and then sat him down and told him we needed to talk about the wedding and about Piper. He immediately got this look on his face like, here we go again. But I held up my hand and told him I needed him to actually listen this time. Not defend, not explain, just listen. And to his credit, he did. For once. I told him everything. I went through 4 years of incidents. The birthday cabin trip, the Portugal disaster, the constant calls at all hours, the way she touches him, the things I overheard her say about me. I told him that I loved him more than anything, but that I couldn't marry someone who didn't have my back. That marriage means we're a team, and right now it feels like I'm competing against his best friend for my own fiancé. He sat there quietly while I talked, and when I was done, he took a deep breath and said he didn't realize it had gotten this bad for me, that he thought I'd been exaggerating because I was jealous, but hearing it all laid out like that made him see how much I'd been dealing with. He said he was sorry. He said he'd talk to Piper again and set real boundaries this time. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him so badly. So I asked him what specifically those boundaries would be. And he started listing things like, no more late night calls unless it's an actual emergency, no more showing up unannounced, being more considerate of our couple time. It all sounded good, but then I asked about the wedding stuff, about her being best woman and planning the bachelor party. His face changed. He got quiet, and then he said he still thought it would mean a lot to Piper to be part of his wedding party, that she'd been there for him through everything, and it felt wrong to exclude her completely. I said I wasn't asking to exclude her completely. She could be a guest like everyone else, but having her stand next to him at the altar while he married me, after everything she's done? No, absolutely not. He started saying I was being rigid, and that this was his wedding too, and he should have a say in who stands up there with him. I said, of course it's your wedding too, but you're asking me to let the woman who's been trying to break us up for years be your best woman. How is that not insane to you? He said I was being dramatic again, that Piper wasn't trying to break us up. She was just protective. Protective. I swear to God if I hear that word one more time. I told him I wasn't budging on this, that it was a deal breaker. If Piper was in the wedding party, I wouldn't be at the wedding at all. He got upset and said I was giving him an ultimatum and that wasn't fair. I said no. What's not fair is that I've spent 4 years tolerating a woman who hates me because you refuse to see what's right in front of your face. What's not fair is that I'm about to marry someone and I still feel like I'm in second place. What's not fair is that you keep choosing her feelings over mine and then acting surprised when I'm hurt by it. We went back and forth for hours, like literally until 2 in the morning. There was crying and yelling, and at one point I grabbed my keys and almost left because I just couldn't take it anymore. But I stayed because I'm stubborn and also because I refuse to be the one who walks away when he's the one being unreasonable. By the end of the night, he finally agreed that Piper wouldn't be best woman. He'd ask Roger to be his best man instead, and Piper could just be a regular guest. I thanked him and told him I appreciated that he listened even though it took forever to get there. He seemed exhausted, and honestly, so was I. We went to bed and I thought, okay, maybe we're finally making progress. Wrong, because the next evening Piper came over. And not just randomly, Anthony had invited her to talk about something he said. I didn't know she was coming until I heard the doorbell and opened it to find her standing there with that smile. She walked past me into our apartment like she owned the place and went straight to Anthony in the living room. I followed her and asked what was going on. Anthony said he wanted to tell Piper in person about the wedding party decision since they'd been friends so long and she deserved to hear it from him. And I know some of you are gonna say that was actually thoughtful of him, but the way he said it, the way he looked at her like he was apologizing for something, made me instantly uneasy. He told Piper that they'd talked it over and decided to go a more traditional route with the wedding party, that Roger was gonna be his best man, that he hoped she understood, and that she was still so important to him. The way her face changed, it was like watching a mask slip. For just a second, I saw real anger in her eyes before she covered it up with this wounded puppy expression. She asked if this was my idea, and before Anthony could answer, I said yes, actually it was. Because I don't think it's appropriate for you to stand next to my fiancé at our wedding given how you feel about me and our relationship. She acted confused, asked what I meant by that, and I told her I heard her. On the phone at Roger's place, saying I was boring and basic and that you've been working on getting Anthony to leave me. I watched her face the entire time I said it, and I swear she looked almost pleased that it was finally out in the open. She turned to Anthony and said she couldn't believe he told me about that it was a private conversation she'd had with her sister when she was upset, that I was taking it out of context. Anthony started to say something, but I cut him off and said I didn't need context. I heard you say you were working on breaking us up. What context makes that okay? Then she did something I didn't expect. She laughed. And she said, okay, fine, you want to do this? Let's do this. And she turned to Anthony and asked him if he was really going to let me stand here and accuse her of things when he knows how she feels about him. I asked what that was supposed to mean. Anthony looked uncomfortable. Piper kept her eyes on him like she was daring him to speak. And when he didn't say anything, she shook her head and said she couldn't do this anymore. That she'd been patient for 4 years, but she was done pretending. I asked, pretending what? And she said pretending she was okay with watching him settle. That she'd been in love with him since they were teenagers. That everyone knew it except apparently me. That she'd been waiting for him to come to his senses and realize they belonged together, but instead, he proposed to someone else. And now she was supposed to stand there and watch him make the biggest mistake of his life. I looked at Anthony. He wouldn't look at me. His jaw was tight, and he was staring at the floor like he wanted it to swallow him whole. I asked him if he knew, if he'd known this whole time that Piper was in love with him. And after what felt like forever, he said yes. He'd always known. She confessed to him years ago before me, and he'd told her he didn't feel the same way. That they'd agreed to just stay friends and not let it affect their friendship. I asked him how the hell he could keep that from me for 4 years. How he could watch me struggle with this woman, watch me question myself, watch me feel crazy and insecure, and never once mention that, oh, by the way, she's been in love with me this whole time, but don't worry about it. He said he didn't think it mattered because he'd rejected her, that Piper had promised to move on, and he trusted her, that telling me would have just made me more paranoid. I said, more paranoid? I had every right to be paranoid apparently because my gut was right the entire time and you gaslit me into thinking I was the problem. Piper was standing there watching this whole thing unfold with this weird expression, almost satisfied, like she'd wanted this to happen. And that's when it hit me. She came here tonight knowing this would blow up. She wanted to force this confrontation. She wanted to destroy my relationship because if she couldn't have Anthony, she'd make damn sure I couldn't either. I told her she needed to leave. Not asked, told. She looked at Anthony like she expected him to defend her and tell me to calm down or something, but he didn't. He just stood there. So she grabbed her purse and said fine, but that this wasn't over. That Anthony would realize eventually that she was right. That I wasn't the one for him. And she walked out. The second the door closed, I turned to Anthony and told him to explain. Everything. All of it. From the beginning. He sat down and started talking. Said Piper confessed her feelings right after college when they were both living in Minneapolis. He'd been caught off guard because he genuinely saw her as a sister and he told her that. She cried, they had a rough few months, but eventually she said she'd accepted it and wanted to stay friends. He believed her. He thought she'd moved on, especially when she started dating other people. I asked him when he started dating me, did she say anything? He got quiet again and then admitted that Piper had been against him dating me from the start. That she'd told him I wasn't right for him, that we didn't have chemistry, that he was making a mistake. He said he'd brushed it off because Piper said that about everyone he dated. Everyone. So this wasn't new behavior. She'd done this with other girlfriends too. And he'd never thought to mention this extremely relevant information to me. I asked him if he had feelings for her. Like real romantic feelings, not friend feeling. He said no. He said she was like family. I said that's what you always say, but family doesn't act like this, Anthony. Family doesn't try to sabotage your relationships. Family doesn't show up trying to blow up your engagement. Are you sure you don't have feelings for her? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been protecting her at my expense for 4 years. He got frustrated and said of course he didn't have romantic feelings for Piper, that he loved me, that he'd proposed to me, that he was marrying me, but that Piper was still his oldest friend and he didn't know how to just cut her off even though he knew she'd been out of line. I asked him if he was planning to stay friends with her after what happened tonight. He didn't answer right away, and that hesitation told me everything. He said he needed time to think, that this was all happening so fast and he didn't want to make a decision he'd regret. Like choosing between his fiancé and the woman who just admitted to trying to break up our relationship was some complicated moral dilemma. I told him if he needed to think about whether or not to stay friends with someone who's been actively working against our relationship, then maybe we had a bigger problem than Piper. Maybe the problem was that I was engaged to someone who didn't know how to put me first. He said that wasn't fair, that I was asking him to throw away 20 years of friendship overnight. I said no, I was asking him to prioritize his wife over a woman who literally just admitted she wanted us to fail. This shouldn't be hard. If our positions were reversed, if Roger or any of my friends had done what Piper did, I wouldn't need time to think about whether to cut them off. It would be immediate. We argued about this for hours too. I'm starting to think that's just how Anthony and I communicate now. Hours-long, exhausting arguments that leave us both drained. By the end of the night, we hadn't really resolved anything. He kept saying he needed time, and I kept saying time for what? To decide if you want to marry me or keep your little girlfriend on the side? He got mad at me for calling Piper his girlfriend and said I was being disrespectful. Disrespectful. To the woman who's been trying to destroy our relationship. Okay, Anthony. I slept in the guest room that night. Not because I was running away, but because I literally couldn't stand to be next to him. I just lay there staring at the ceiling thinking about the last 4 years. Every time he'd called me jealous. Every time he'd told me I was being paranoid. Every time he'd chosen Piper's comfort over mine. And the whole time he knew she was in love with him. He knew, and he let me feel like I was going insane. The next morning, things were awkward. He tried to make small talk like nothing had happened, and I just stared at him until he stopped. I told him I wasn't going to pretend everything was fine. That until he made a decision about Piper, I didn't know where we stood. He asked if I was giving him another ultimatum, and I said no, I was stating facts. I can't marry someone who can't choose me. It's not complicated. He went to work, and I called in sick because I literally couldn't function. I called my mom and told her everything. She's always liked Anthony, but when I told her about Piper being in love with him this whole time and him hiding it, she went off. Said she never trusted that girl. Said she could tell from the way Piper looked at Anthony at family dinners. Said if Anthony didn't cut Piper off immediately, I should rethink this engagement. Hearing my mom validate everything I'd been feeling was both comforting and devastating. I don't know what's going to happen next. Anthony's been texting me throughout the day saying he loves me and he's sorry, and he just needs a little more time to figure things out with Piper. I haven't responded. What am I supposed to say? Take all the time you need deciding if you want to marry me or run off with your childhood sweetheart. Oh, and get this. Piper posted something on Instagram today. A throwback photo of her and Anthony from high school prom. They went as friends, apparently, because neither of them had dates. The caption was, "Some things are just meant to be, timing is everything," and Anthony hasn't said a word about it. I'm so angry, and I'm starting to think that no matter how much I love this man, maybe loving him isn't enough. I'll update again when something happens. At this point, I'm just waiting to see if he chooses me or if I need to start figuring out how to cancel a wedding. Last update. Okay, so this is gonna be my last update because honestly, there's nothing left to say after what happened. After my last post, I gave Anthony 3 days. 3 days to figure out if he was gonna choose me or keep Piper in his life. I told him I wasn't going to beg or argue anymore. He knew what I needed. Either he was gonna step up or he wasn't. Those 3 days were hell. He kept trying to have normal conversations with me like we weren't in the middle of a crisis. Asking what I wanted for dinner, commenting on something he saw on TV, acting like if he just pretended hard enough, everything would go back to normal. I barely responded, just waited. On the 3rd night, he came home and told me he'd made a decision. I braced myself because honestly, I didn't know which way this was gonna go. Part of me hoped he'd finally gotten it. That he'd tell me he'd cut Piper off, that he was sorry, that he chose me. He sat down across from me and said he'd thought about it a lot. That he loved me and wanted to marry me. That Piper had crossed lines and he understood why I was hurt. But there's always a but with him. He said he couldn't just end a 20-year friendship completely. That Piper was going through a hard time and cutting her off entirely felt cruel. That maybe they could just have less contact for a while until things calmed down. Less contact. For a while. Until things calmed down. I asked him if he was serious. He said he was trying to find a compromise. A middle ground where everyone could be okay. I told him there was no middle ground here. Piper admitted she was in love with him. She admitted she'd been trying to break us up. She posted that Instagram thing basically declaring her intentions. And his solution was, less contact? He started getting frustrated saying I was being inflexible. That relationships required compromise. That I couldn't expect him to just delete someone from his life like she never existed. I told him I wasn't asking him to pretend she never existed. I was asking him to protect our relationship from someone who wanted to destroy it. How was that inflexible? Then he said something that made everything crystal clear. He said maybe part of the problem was that I'd never really tried to understand his relationship with Piper. That they had history I couldn't compete with. That if I'd just been more secure from the beginning, maybe none of this would have happened. Compete with. He actually said those words to my face. Like I was in a competition I'd been losing this whole time. I stood up and told him he was right. I couldn't compete with Piper. And I was done trying. I was done being second place in my own relationship. Done being the bad guy for having basic expectations. Done waiting for him to choose me when it was obvious he never would. He looked shocked, asked what I meant by done. I pulled off my engagement ring and put it on the table between us. Told him I wasn't going to marry someone who couldn't put me first. That I deserved better than being some consolation prize he settled for while keeping his real love on the back burner. He started backpedaling immediately, saying he didn't mean it like that. That I was twisting his words. That we could work through this if I'd just calm down and talk to him. I told him we'd been talking for 4 years. Talking in circles while he defended the woman who wanted us to fail. I was done talking. He grabbed my hand and said, "Please don't do this." That he loved me. That he'd cut Piper off completely if that's what it took. And you know what? A week ago that might have worked. A week ago I might have cried and hugged him and believed he finally understood. But hearing him say it now, only after I'd already taken off the ring, only after I'd forced his hand, I realized something. He wasn't choosing me. He was just trying not to lose. There's a difference. Choosing someone means putting them first without being threatened into it. What he was doing was damage control. I told him it was too late, that I'd needed him to choose me weeks ago, months ago, years ago, and every single time he'd chosen her comfort over mine. I wasn't going to wait around for him to finally value me only because I was walking out the door. He cried, said he didn't want to lose me, that I was the love of his life, that Piper meant nothing compared to me, and maybe he believed that. Maybe in his mind he really thought he loved me more, but his actions for 4 years had shown me otherwise, and I couldn't unsee that. I told him I'd be staying with my mom for a while, that I'd come get my stuff when I was ready, that I hoped he and Piper were very happy together since that's clearly what she'd been working toward this whole time. He tried to stop me from leaving, not physically, just with words, promises, apologies. Everything he should have said years ago coming out now when it was too late to matter. I walked past him and grabbed my bag and left. My mom held me while I cried for like 3 hours that night. Not because I missed him already. Because I was mourning 4 years I'd wasted on someone who never fully chose me. Because I was angry at myself for not trusting my gut sooner. Because starting over at this point in my life wasn't what I'd planned. Anthony's been texting me nonstop since I left, saying he made a huge mistake, saying he'll do anything, saying Piper means nothing. I haven't responded to any of it. Nothing he can say will change what I learned about where I actually stood with him. And yeah, I saw that Piper posted another throwback photo the day after I left. Her and Anthony at some wedding years ago, her in a bridesmaid dress, him in a suit, her looking at him like he hung the moon. Caption was just a heart emoji. So I guess she got what she wanted. Or maybe she didn't. Because Anthony doesn't actually love her either. He just couldn't let go of the attention. The ego boost of having 2 women want him. And now he's gonna be alone with nobody but the friend who was never really just a friend. Honestly, they deserve each other. I'm gonna be okay. Better than okay eventually. But right now, I'm just glad it's over.